Have you ever witnessed a scene where, on the very day of the divorce, your ex-husband wraps his arm around his mistress and hurls harsh words, only to find out moments later that his ex-wife holds full ownership of everything he owns? Can you believe that a wife once belittled as nothing without him would, the second the divorce certificate is issued, take control of shares in a 100 billion yuan conglomerate and sit in the chairman's seat of her ex-husband's company to hear his work reports? When your husband unblinkingly takes the startup capital you got from selling your house, erases all your contributions, and builds a life with his secretary atop all your sacrifices, have you ever wondered that fate has long hidden a trump card for your comeback? Elaina stared down at the crisp divorce certificate, clutched between her fingers, its scarlet cover glinting harshly beneath the midday sunlight, filtering through the glass windows of the county clerk's office parking lot. Mark stood inches away from her, his tailored charcoal blazer stretched tight across broad shoulders, one arm casually slung around the slender waist of his secretary, Sarah Miller. There was no flicker of remorse in his cold grey eyes, only impatient relief that the 30-day mandatory waiting period had finally drawn to an end. "If you're having second thoughts, speak up now. I'm not going to cut you any slack later," Mark drawled, his tone sharp and dismissive, as if Elaina was nothing more than an annoying afterthought lingering in the background of his perfect new life. Elaina folded the certificate neatly and slipped it into the inner pocket of her plain canvas tote bag, her features smooth and unreadable despite the storm of suppressed emotion churning beneath her calm exterior. "I won't take it back." A visible weight lifted off Mark's shoulders the instant those two quiet words left her lips. Sarah's lips curled into a smug, triumphant smile, her fingers looping possessively through Mark's bicep as she tilted her chin upward to meet Elena's gaze. "Mark, we can head straight to the office to share our big news with the whole team now, can't we?" Sarah purred, her diamond ring catching the sunlight so brilliantly it made Elena's eyes sting. Mark nodded faintly, his gaze flicking back to Elaina with a final cold warning. "Don't reach out to me again. We're done for good." Elaina said nothing in response, her mind drifting back to the years they'd spent scraping by together, memories soft and bittersweet before they curdled into resentment. She'd been there at the very beginning, back when Mark's tech startup existed, only as a half-baked idea scribbled onto crumpled notebook paper, when their office fit into a cramped 130-square-foot basement studio. While Mark tinkered endlessly with prototype software at their rickety folding table, Elaina had juggling back-to-back client calls, surviving on cheap microwave ramen night after night to stretch their meager startup funds as far as possible. Once the company finally gained traction, everything shifted irreparably. Mark traded his thrifted hoodies for designer suits, leased a luxury sedan, and filled his calendar with high society industry galas. Meanwhile, Elaina faded into the shadows, branded as plain, undereducated, and far too unpolished to fit alongside his rising professional status. 6 months prior, Sarah had stepped fully into Elena's place, accompanying Mark to every public event, laughing at his jokes and posing for photos on his arm without a single ounce of restraint. Today, there was no longer any need for secrecy. Sarah lifted her hand to flaunt the large diamond band wrapped around her ring finger, her voice sickly sweet with false sympathy. "Don't worry about Mark, Elaina. I'll take excellent care of him from here on out." Elena's gaze locked onto that ring, recognition settling heavy in her chest. It had been showcased as a high-value corporate gift at the company's 3rd-year anniversary gala, one Mark had claimed he planned to present to a vital business partner. Clearly, that partner had only ever been Sarah. Helen, Mark's mother, hovered nearby, her lined face stretched wide in an unmasked grin of satisfaction. This divorce is long overdue. Our family won't have to waste resources supporting dead weight any longer. Elaina bit back, every retort burning on the tip of her tongue. Some people clung rigidly to their biased, warped perceptions, and no amount of honest explanation would ever shift their unshakable judgments. She watched Mark, Sarah, and Helen turn toward their parked luxury sedan, ready to drive away and leave her behind for good, until her phone buzzed sharply inside her bag, an unfamiliar landline number lighting up the screen. She answered the call slowly, her voice steady despite the quiet tremor in her bones. "This is Elaina Reid speaking." "Good afternoon, Ms. Reid. My name is Shane Wells, lead attorney for the Reid Family Trust under Arthur Reid's last will and testament. We're reaching out to inform you that all inheritance eligibility conditions have been fully satisfied." Elena's breath caught in her throat, shock rippling through her system at the mention of her late grandfather's full name. There must be some mistake. Grandfather never spoke of a trust to me before his passing. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, Shane's tone measured and formal as he walked her through every clause of the decades-old legal document. There is no error. Mr. Arthur Reid drafted strict terms within his will. You were barred from accessing any family assets for the full duration of your marriage to Mark Carter. Inheritance proceedings would only initiate the moment your husband voluntarily filed for divorce, and your legal single status was officially confirmed. Elena's fingers tightened around the plastic phone casing, her heart aching with unspoken confusion. Grandfather had never breathed a word of this elaborate plan during their quiet Sunday visits, never hinted at the layers of protection he'd arranged for her future. Shane's voice continued, soft with the quiet wisdom Arthur had carried all his life. Your grandfather once told me that a man who truly intends to stand beside you through hardship will never cast you aside once fortune arrives. If someone chooses to walk away from you of their own accord, they forfeit any right to share in the prosperity you were meant to inherit. Elaina remained silent for a long stretch, processing the magnitude of what she'd just learnt, before Shane delivered the second bombshell that sent her pulse racing. There is another critical update to share with you, Ms. Reid. 3 months prior to today, Reid Global Holdings finalized a full 100% acquisition of Carter Tech, the startup Mark founded. Elena's eyes widened, every muscle in her body going rigid. Carter Tech, the company Mark bragged about relentlessly, the business he claimed he'd built entirely through his own grit and talent, belonged to her family's corporate empire now. Effective immediately, you hold 51% majority ownership of Reid Global Holdings, and you are officially appointed as Group Chairwoman. Carter Tech falls fully under your direct operational oversight from this moment forward. As the weight of that revelation crashed over her, a sleek black Rolls-Royce glided smoothly to a stop directly beside the sidewalk where Elaina stood. A uniformed chauffeur stepped out, hurrying around the vehicle to pull open the rear passenger door, his posture steeped in unwavering deference. Chairwoman Reid, the board of directors is assembled at the global headquarters, awaiting your arrival for an emergency briefing. Mark, Sarah, and Helen had already climbed halfway into their own car, but Mark twisted around at the sound of the chauffeur's respectful address, his brow furrowed in mild irritation and curiosity. "Who's that driver talking to?" he muttered to Sarah, nodding toward Elena's figure on the sidewalk. Sarah scoffed dismissively, rolling her eyes. "Probably some wealthy executive who just finished paperwork here. It certainly isn't Elaina. She has nothing to her name without you." Neither of them spared Elaina another glance, completely oblivious as the chauffeur crossed the pavement and bowed low at her side. "Your vehicle is ready, Chairwoman." Elaina cast one final, impassive glance at Mark's retreating form, every bitter memory of their shared struggles and his subsequent cruelty flickering through her mind in a rapid montage. She slid into the leather back seat of the Rolls-Royce without a single backward look, and the heavy door clicked shut behind her with a soft, definitive thud. As the car pulled away from the clerk's office lot, Elaina watched Mark's silhouette shrink smaller and smaller in the rearview mirror. He had no idea that the divorce papers he'd been so eager to sign hadn't only ended their broken marriage. They'd single-handedly destroyed every ounce of power and pride he'd spent years building for himself. Inside Carter Tech's glass and steel headquarters that afternoon, the main conference room hummed with restless chatter from every tier of company management. Two major pieces of news circulated through every cubicle and corner of the building. Mark Carter was officially divorced, free to pursue a public relationship with Sarah Miller, and the parent corporation Reed Global Holdings would be sending a brand new group chairwoman to oversee all operations starting that day. Mark stood at the head of the long walnut conference table, clad in an immaculate custom suit, a self-satisfied grin plastered across his face as he raised a crystal wine glass to address the assembled executives. "I want to thank each and every one of you for walking alongside me through every hurdle this startup has faced since day one," he announced, prompting a loud, enthusiastic round of applause to echo off the floor-to-ceiling glass walls. Sarah sat primly at his right elbow, her crisp white business dress perfectly tailored, her smile bright and unhidden as she leaned into Mark's shoulder. Mark lifted his glass higher, the joy in his voice thick and performative. "I also have another exciting announcement to share with all of you today. Sarah and I are officially entering a committed romantic partnership." Cheers and congratulations erupted instantly throughout the room, dozens of managers calling them a perfect, well-matched pair. Only Ken Bennett, the senior lead engineer who'd been there from the company's very first week, stared down at his notebook in quiet, heavy sorrow. He alone remembered the truth behind Carter Tech's origins, how Elaina had ridden a beat-up electric scooter across dozens of miles every single day to lock down client contracts, how she'd sold the family home she'd inherited to scrape together the startup capital that kept their failing operation afloat through months of unpaid wages. Now, every trace of her sacrifice had been erased from the company's official narrative, all credit funneled straight to Mark alone. Mark waved a hand to quiet the room, his tone breezy and ungrateful. "We leave the past where it belongs. It's time to focus our energy on bigger, brighter opportunities ahead." Sarah pressed herself tighter against his side, her voice warm and loyal for every pair of listening ears. "I'll stand beside you every step of the way as we expand this company to even greater heights." The applause had barely faded when the front office secretary pushed the conference room door open, a printed memo clutched in her hands. "Mr. Carter, Reed Global Holdings just sent formal notice that the new chairwoman will arrive at 3 o'clock sharp. All mid-level and senior leadership are required to gather in the main lobby for a formal welcome." A murmur of awe rippled through the crowd. Rumors swirled that Reed Global controlled billions in assets across real estate, medical research, renewable energy, chip manufacturing, artificial intelligence, and media production. Carter Tech was merely one tiny subsidiary within their massive portfolio. Mark chuckled confidently, straightening the silk tie around his neck. "Whoever this chairwoman is, they'll be an extremely influential figure. Make certain we make an impeccable first impression. We don't want to damage Carter Tech's reputation in front of corporate leadership." Beneath his composed exterior, Mark's mind raced with ambitious plans. If he managed to impress the new top executive, he might earn a coveted promotion to a leadership role within Reed Global's central headquarters, catapulting his career to stratospheric new heights. Meanwhile, 30 floors up at Reed Global's downtown skyscraper headquarters, the black Rolls-Royce glided to a stop beneath the covered entryway. Shane Wells waited on the marble pavement to greet Elaina, his grey tailored suit sharp and professional, a gentle, knowing smile tugging at his lips. "Welcome home, Ms. Reed." Elaina let out a quiet, bitter laugh as she stepped out of the vehicle, still struggling to fully grasp the reality unfolding around her. "It still feels like I'm trapped inside some surreal dream." Shane fell into step beside her as they crossed the polished lobby toward the private executive elevator bank, his voice calm and reassuring. "Your grandfather mapped out every detail of this transition decades ago, bound strictly by the legal terms of his will. We were forbidden from disclosing any information to you until your divorce was finalized." The elevator carried them non-stop to the 68th floor, and, as the metal doors slid open, more than a dozen high-ranking corporate executives lined the hallway, bowing their heads in synchronized respect the moment Elaina stepped into view. "Chairwoman Reed," they spoke in unified, quiet unison. Elena's gait faltered for half a second, unused to such deference and formal authority. Shane leaned in to murmur soft guidance beside her ear. "There's no need for nervousness. Every asset, every division under this corporate umbrella legally belongs to you now." A junior assistant hurried forward, pressing a thick leather binder into Elena's waiting hands, its pages filled with color-coded breakdowns of the entire conglomerate's global holdings. Elaina flipped slowly through the documents, her eyes widening further with every new industry listed within the pages. Real estate developments across 3 continents, state-of-the-art medical research labs, renewable energy power plants, advanced semiconductor fabrication facilities, AI software labs, major film and streaming studios, and tucked near the back, a tiny subsection dedicated solely to Carter Tech, framed as the smallest subsidiary within the entire empire. Shane checked his wristwatch and redirected her attention back to the day's schedule. "You're required to travel to Carter Tech at 2:30 this afternoon to formally announce your appointment as chairwoman and subsidiary overseer." Before Elaina could respond, another folder was handed to her, this one filled with Mark Carter's 3-year performance reports for Carter Tech. She flipped open the cover, and one bold printed line stopped her cold. 0 to 100 million USD annual revenue, single-handedly achieved by founder Mark Carter. A cold, hollow smile spread across Elena's face as she read those words, every memory of her own grueling sacrifices surging to the forefront of her mind. The first batch of paying clients had all been sourced and negotiated by her. The startup's critical seed funding had come from the proceeds of her family home sale. Even the name Carter Tech had been brainstormed and suggested by her late one night in their cramped basement office. Now, all of those contributions had been erased, credited exclusively to Mark as his solo accomplishment. She closed the report folder slowly, her gaze hardening with quiet resolve as she turned toward Shane. "Before we leave for Carter Tech, pull every single document related to the company's founding phase. Bank transfer records, initial shareholder agreements, original client contracts. Nothing is to be omitted." Shane's lips quirked upward in a subtle, knowing smile. "Consider it done, Chairwoman. Someone is about to face a long overdue reckoning for rewriting history to suit his own ego." By 10 o'clock that same morning, the entire Carter Tech campus buzzed with anxious preparation. Janitors polished the lobby marble floors until they shone mirror-bright. Administrative teams replaced every floral display with fresh premium bouquets, and brand-new plush welcome carpeting was rolled out across the main entrance walkway. Groups of employees, clustered by the break rooms, whispering speculation about the mysterious incoming chairwoman. No one had laid eyes on any Reed Global executives beyond the legal team that signed the acquisition paperwork 3 months prior, and wild rumors circulated about the identity of the top corporate leader set to arrive that afternoon. Inside Mark's private, glass-walled corner office, he stood before the floor-to-ceiling city view, fussing endlessly over his silk necktie for the 3rd time that day. Sarah carried a steaming ceramic mug of coffee to his desk, watching his fidgeting with amused fondness. "You've changed 3 ties already this morning. There's no need to stress so much," she teased, stepping forward to straighten the fabric neatly against his collar. "You've grown this company's profits 40% in the last fiscal year. The chairwoman will certainly be impressed with your work and eager to advance your career." Mark mirrored her optimistic confidence, his mind already wandering to the promotions and corporate status he believed he deserved. Carter Tech's performance metrics stood out among all the small subsidiaries under Reed Global's control. There was every chance this new executive would pluck him from his mid-sized startup and place him in a prestigious headquarters leadership role. An administrative director knocked rapidly on the office door, rushing inside with an urgent update. "Mr. Carter, Reed Global just phoned ahead. The chairwoman's motorcade has departed the central tower and is en route to our location." Mark glanced down at his luxury watch, calculating the 20-minute drive time between the 2 downtown buildings. "Alert every manager and department, head to assemble in the lobby by 2 o'clock sharp. No one is permitted to arrive late for the welcome." Back at Reed Global headquarters, Elaina changed into a sleek, minimalist black-tailored pantsuit. No designer logos or flashy embellishments adorning the fabric. Understated, authoritative, and entirely her own style. Her personal assistant handed over a printed run sheet outlining every scheduled event for the Carter Tech visit. Arrival at 2:20 p.m., official appointment announcement at 2:30 p.m., full leadership roundtable at 2:40 p.m., and a formal business presentation delivered by Mark at 3 o'clock on the dot. Elena's gaze lingered on that final line, a faint, sardonic smile tugging at her mouth. "He's going to deliver a performance report directly to me?" Shane nodded in confirmation. Per corporate hierarchy policy, all subsidiary general managers report straight to the group chairwoman. Elaina folded the schedule shut, her heart lightening with quiet, unanticipated freedom. Once, she genuinely believed she could never survive independently without Mark's support and status. Today, the truth was laid bare for her to see. He had been the one completely dependent on her hard work and sacrifice all along. Her assistant tapped the office doorframe to signal the vehicle was waiting outside the lobby. Elaina grabbed her leather portfolio and rose from her desk. "Let's go." The black Rolls-Royce navigated the downtown streets smoothly, while at Carter Tech's main lobby, dozens of managers lined up in 2 neat parallel rows along the polished marble floors, every pair of eyes fixed on the driveway, waiting for the corporate motorcade to appear. Mark stood front and center of the crowd, checking his wristwatch repeatedly, tension thrumming through his frame. At exactly 2:20 p.m., the glossy black luxury sedan rounded the corner and pulled to a stop at the building's front steps. A collective hush fell over the assembled crowd as all heads turned to watch the vehicle's doors swing open. Shane stepped out first, his grey suit instantly recognizable to Mark from the acquisition signing months prior. Mark hurried forward to extend his hand in a polite greeting, but Shane only offered a shallow, distant nod, no warm handshake exchanged. Mark's mind immediately jumped to the conclusion that the true chairwoman remained hidden inside the back of the car. Every gaze locked onto the opposite passenger door as it swung open. A pair of polished black block heels touched down on the marble pavement, followed by Elaina stepping into full view, her dark hair pulled back into a crisp, elegant, low bun, subtle, refined makeup softening her sharp features. An enormous contrast to the frumpy, unassuming housewife Mark had grown accustomed to seeing at home. Mark's wide grin froze solid on his face, shock and confusion flooding his expression in an instant. Elaina? Elaina? Sarah's jaw dropped open beside him, disbelief etched across every inch of her features. What is she doing here? Mark strode quickly across the welcome mat to close the distance between them, his voice lowered into an irritated, accusatory hiss so only she could hear. We agreed to cut all contact after the divorce. Did you follow me here to cause a scene? Elena's expression remained serene, no flicker of anger or hurt crossing her face. I didn't track you down. I came here for official corporate business. Mark let out a bitter, mocking laugh, crossing his arms tightly over his chest. Official business? The group chairwoman is visiting our headquarters today. This space isn't for random former spouses to loiter around. Sarah stepped forward, sizing Elaina up and down with unmasked disdain, her tone dripping with condescension. This is a private executive inspection, Elaina. Non-staff outsiders aren't allowed inside the building. If you're desperate to speak to Mark, wait until the end of the workday. Whispered murmurs rippled through the rows of employees lined up behind them. Several junior staff members recognized Elaina from the company's earliest days, exchanging quiet speculations among themselves. That's Mark's ex-wife, right? I bet she's here begging him to take her back. What else could a stay-at-home housewife possibly do once the marriage fell apart? Elaina ignored the snide whispers bouncing off the marble walls, her gaze sweeping over the lobby space she'd helped build from the ground up. She'd hung every framed corporate mission statement on these walls after long nights of painting and assembly, hauled every potted green plant into the conference rooms herself, spent 3 full weekends haggling with furniture vendors to secure the reception desk still positioned at the lobby's far wall. Yet not a single person standing here remembered the labor she'd poured into this building's creation. Mark misread her quiet stillness as regret and desperation, softening his sharp tone slightly to deliver a patronizing warning. We parted on amicable terms. Don't ruin today's important corporate visit by creating a disruption. If the chairwoman witnesses a scene, it will damage my professional reputation irreparably. Elaina let a faint, cool smile curve her lips. You think I've traveled here to make a fuss? Before Mark could retort, Shane stepped forward, cutting through the tense silence with his clear, authoritative voice. Mr. Carter, the chairwoman is ready to enter the conference room for the scheduled briefing. Mark's head snapped toward Shane, confused and annoyed. The chairwoman hasn't exited the vehicle yet. This woman is just my ex-wife, with no corporate standing here. Shane simply stepped aside, gesturing with one outstretched palm toward Elaina, every eye in the lobby following the motion. Chairwoman Reed, please proceed into the conference room. Mark's brain short-circuited entirely, every ounce of confidence draining from his posture as he stared blankly at Elena's poised figure standing before him. She walked past his frozen form without a single glance backward, Shane falling into quiet step beside her as they headed for the bank of glass elevators, while Mark rushed ahead with all the other managers to arrange seating in the main conference hall, completely oblivious that the woman he'd dismissed as a powerless nobody was the executive he'd spent all morning preparing to impress. The large executive conference room was silent enough to hear a pin drop when Elaina and Shane pushed through the double doors, dozens of mid-level managers and Reed Global Headquarters staff seated along both sides of the long walnut table. Mark hurried to the empty, oversized leather chair positioned at the table's head, carefully pulling it out with a wide, welcoming smile directed at the doorway. "The chairwoman's seat is ready. We've been waiting for your arrival," he announced loudly, turning to face the entryway expectantly. Elaina walked steadily past every row of seated executives, Sarah stepping abruptly into her path to block her forward progress, her expression sharp and confrontational. "This is a closed corporate leadership meeting for authorized management personnel only. You weren't granted entry clearance, so you need to leave immediately." Elena's voice stayed level and calm, no trace of hostility present in her tone. "Step aside." Sarah let out a shrill, disbelieving scoff, planting her feet firmly on the carpet to block Elena's path entirely. "On what authority do you get to walk in here uninvited? Just because you used to be Mark's wife doesn't grant you access to executive meetings." More hushed whispers spread throughout the conference room, employees assuming Elaina had come to throw a dramatic tantrum to win Mark back on this critical corporate visit day. Mark's patience snapped completely, and he raised his voice to call for security personnel stationed near the hallway doors. "Escort this unauthorized visitor off company premises at once." Shane interjected before security could cross the room, his tone firm and unyielding. "Watch your wording, Mr. Carter." Mark spun toward the attorney, confused and defensive. "She isn't a member of the Reed Global corporate team. She has no right to be in this confidential leadership briefing." Shane said nothing in reply, instead moving to place an official embossed corporate resolution document directly in the center of the conference table for every attendee to read. He nodded once toward Elaina, a clear signal for her to take the head chair Mark had prepared for the unknown chairwoman minutes earlier. Elaina glided forward and sank into that leather seat without hesitation. The entire room descended into stunned, absolute silence, every face locked on her figure at the head of the table. Sarah's self-assured grin dissolved into stunned blankness, her feet frozen to the carpet as she struggled to process the impossible scene unfolding in front of her eyes. Mark stood rigid beside the table edge, his face alternating between shades of pale white and furious crimson, unable to form a single coherent sentence. Shane's voice echoed clearly across the quiet room as he read the formal corporate resolution aloud for all present to hear. By unanimous vote of the Reed Global Holdings Board of Directors, Elaina Reed is officially appointed Group Chairwoman effective immediately, with full oversight authority over Carter Tech as the subsidiary's direct chair. Mark Carter retains his position as Carter Tech General Manager, and per official corporate policy, all operational reports, financial disclosures, and project updates must be submitted directly to Chairwoman Reed for review and approval. One by one, every corporate executive sent from Reed Global rose to their feet, offering formal, respectful nods toward Elaina, seated at the head of the table. The Carter Tech management team hesitated for a heartbeat before following suit, the weight of the revelation sinking into each of their minds. Mark remained rooted to his spot beside the table, his knuckles white where he gripped the wooden edge, reeling from the truth that the woman he'd discarded as worthless had climbed to a position of authority far beyond anything he could ever hope to achieve. Elaina lifted her gaze to meet Mark's shaken eyes, her tone quiet yet commanding enough to fill every corner of the silent conference hall. "Mr. Carter, I believe you prepared a full performance report to present to corporate leadership today. We can begin your briefing now." Mark's throat tightened, unable to produce a single word in response, while Elaina opened the leather portfolio resting on the table before her, flipping to the first page of his self-aggrandizing 3-year performance summary. She glanced upward once more, a quiet, pointed edge entering her voice. "Before we dive into quarterly metrics, There is another matter we need to address. The $3,600,000 USD seed capital used to launch Carter Tech. I believe it's long past time we clarify the full, unaltered truth behind those startup funds. A heavy tension blanketed the conference room as every manager leaned forward in their seats, eyes fixed on the two figures at the table's head. Mark forced himself to regain a semblance of composure despite the panic coiling tight in his gut, clinging to the fabricated narrative he'd repeated for years. All funding documentation on file is accurate and verified. The initial $3.6 million startup capital was raised independently by myself as the company's founding leader. Elaina pushed the printed performance report across the polished wood toward him, gesturing to the bold printed claim on the final page. Take a moment to reread that line before we continue. Are you certain every statement within this document is fully truthful and unmodified? Mark scanned the text briefly, his jaw set stubbornly. The filing is official corporate record. There are no errors to correct. Elaina let out a soft, humorless laugh, shaking her head faintly. You claim those funds came solely from your personal assets? That is entirely false. Mark's temper flared, his voice rising defensively. This business was established 3 years ago. Rehashing ancient financial details serves no productive purpose today. Accuracy in corporate reporting is always productive, Elaina countered evenly. If official performance summaries contain intentional falsehoods, Reed Global is required to launch a full, independent financial audit of all subsidiary operations. The mere mention of a formal corporate audit sent a ripple of alarm through every manager seated around the table. Mark's face paled noticeably, understanding the severe professional consequences a full investigation would bring to his leadership role. Shane opened a thick sealed archival binder he'd carried into the room, sliding stacks of certified bank records, property sale paperwork, and original founding shareholder agreements across the table surface one by one for everyone to examine. Document 1, dated June 16, 3 years prior. Elaina Reed finalized the sale of her inherited residential property for $3.62 million USD. Document 2, same calendar day. The full $3.6 million proceeds were wired directly into Carter Tech's temporary startup bank account. Additional records confirm those funds covered all initial office rent, hardware purchases, and first payroll cycles for the founding team. Each certified document landed on the table with a soft thud. Mark's face draining of color with every new piece of irrefutable evidence laid out before the entire leadership team. Ken Bennett, the senior engineer who'd witnessed every early struggle firsthand, rose slowly from his chair, his voice steady and resolute as he prepared to speak the truth no one else had dared to voice publicly. I can corroborate every piece of this documentation, Ken announced, all eyes swiveling towards his figure. In the company's first quarter of operation, we went 3 consecutive months without receiving paychecks. It was Elaina who liquidated her family home to keep this startup from collapsing entirely. Mark slammed his palm hard against the table surface, frustration and embarrassment boiling over into a sharp outburst. That money was given to me voluntarily during our marriage. Spouses share assets. Why dig up old history to create conflict now? Elaina reached across the table to slide a copy of Carter Tech's original state business registration paperwork directly in front of Mark, the founder field displaying only his full name, every reference to her financial investment completely erased from official company records. If marital assets are supposed to be shared equally, then why was my entire financial contribution omitted from every founding legal document? Mark stared down at the registration form, unable to conjure a single excuse to counter the undeniable proof spread out for the entire room to witness. He attempted to regain control of the tense conversation minutes later, crossing his arms over his chest with a stiff, defensive posture. "Even if the seed capital originated from your property sale, I've single-handedly managed all daily operations and revenue growth for 3 years running. Without my ongoing leadership, this company would never have reached its current market position." Elaina directed a brief glance toward Robert Hale, Reed Global's lead audit director, who'd accompanied her to the meeting. "Launch a comprehensive full-scope audit of every Carter Tech operational record dating back to the company's founding date. Pull all client contracts, original sales visit logs, and signed deal confirmations for the audit team to cross-reference." Mark's panic spiked sharply at that order, his tone sharp with accusation. "This is nothing more than personal retaliation over our failed marriage." "Corporate audits are conducted to verify factual business records, not settle personal grievances," Elaina replied coolly. "If every report you've filed is completely honest and transparent, you have no reason to fear the investigation results." Before Mark could fire back a retort, the conference room doors swung wide open, Robert Hale stepping inside with 4 additional certified audit specialists hauling heavy locked file crates filled with archived digital and physical business records. He addressed Elaina directly with formal deference. "Chairwoman Reed, the full audit team is assembled and ready to begin all cross-verification procedures." Robert turned his attention to Mark next, listing every category of documentation required for immediate review. "Mr. Carter, we request full access to all original client acquisition paperwork, field visit logs, signed project proposals, sales commission approval forms, and archived client communications dating back to launch." Mark attempted to deflect the demand with a weak evasion. Many of those early physical files were misplaced over 3 years of office relocations and renovations. Robert shook his head without hesitation, pulling up digital cloud archive records on his tablet for everyone to view. Reed Global's centralized data server maintains encrypted backups of every company document, alongside permanent bank transaction archives and email storage logs. No records are permanently lost or destroyed. The audit team projected scanned copies of Elaina's original client field visit logs onto the large wall screen at the front of the room, page after page, listing her full name as the sole on-site negotiator for every major initial client partnership. 17 consecutive field visit entries bore her signature, with 0 records documenting Mark's presence at any of those critical deal-making meetings. Follow-up signed client confirmation forms repeated the same pattern, Elena's handwriting marking every finalized early contract. Robert's voice carried clearly through the stunned silence of the conference room as he read aloud excerpts from Carter Tech's public marketing materials, contrasting the printed narrative against the archived field logs. Official company promotional materials state founder Mark Carter secured all core initial client partnerships through independent outreach. Every archived field record proves that claim to be factually incorrect. Mark stood frozen beneath the glow of the projection screen, every fabricated piece of his self-crafted success story unraveling piece by piece in front of his entire management team and corporate oversight leadership. He tried to salvage his credibility minutes later, gesturing towards stacks of product development patents and software copyright filings lined along the conference table. "I handled all technical product design and software development work, while Elaina managed basic sales outreach. The product itself is what convinced clients to sign long-term contracts. Sales work holds far less foundational value than core engineering innovation." Elaina gestured for Robert to pull archived audio recordings of the original client negotiation sessions onto the projection system's speakers. Clear, crisp audio filled the room, Elena's voice leading every hour-long deal discussion, addressing every technical question, negotiating pricing frameworks, and finalizing all contractual terms on her own. Mark's voice never appeared once across 5 separate multi-hour negotiation recordings, clients repeatedly asking where Mark was located, while Elaina explained he remained occupied with back-end software development. Post-sign-off client follow-up interview transcripts were displayed next. Every business leader asked to name the individual responsible for securing their multi-year corporate partnership, unanimously responding with Elena's full name. Ken Bennett rose once more to share another long-concealed truth from the company's earliest development phase, retrieving an aged portable storage drive covered in faint scratch marks from his jacket pocket and sliding it onto the tabletop. This drive contains every unedited raw code draft from our first product prototype. The primary core algorithm, credited solely to Mark across all patent filings, was developed collaboratively by a 4-person engineering team, including myself, 2 other junior developers, and Mark. No single individual created the complete foundational software architecture alone. Digital timestamp verification confirmed the drive's files had never been altered or edited. The full team's developer signatures embedded within every version of the source code drafts displayed on screen for the entire room to witness. Mark's last remaining defense crumbled away entirely, leaving him with no fabricated narrative left to hide behind. A frantic administrative assistant burst through the conference room doors mid-investigation briefing, her voice tight with urgent alarm. Chairwoman Reed, Gary Thompson, CEO of Thompson Medical Systems, has arrived unannounced at the building's main lobby and insists on an immediate private meeting with the original lead account manager for our multi-year contract with his firm. Gary Thompson stepped into the conference room moments afterward, his grey hair neatly combed, a thick leather folder tucked beneath one arm, the weight of his $200 million annual partnership with Carter Tech hanging over every conversation in the room. Mark hurried forward to greet him with an artificially warm smile, ready to claim full credit for their years-long, lucrative business relationship. Mr. Thompson, it's a pleasure to welcome you to our headquarters today. We've prepared revised expansion proposals to present for your upcoming fiscal year budget. Gary barely acknowledged Mark's outstretched hand, scanning the crowd of assembled executives in search of a familiar face. I'm not here to discuss new expansion plans. I came to locate the original lead negotiator who closed our foundational partnership 3 years ago. Mark's smile faltered instantly, forcing a confident tone despite the unease twisting his insides. I've personally managed every aspect of our account with Thompson Medical from day one. There's no other lead representative for our contract. Gary's expression hardened with quiet disappointment, shaking his head slowly from side to side. The technical product consultations were handled by you, yes, but the person who convinced our board to approve this high-risk startup partnership was never Mark Carter. His gaze swept the room once more before landing squarely on Elaina, seated at the head conference chair, recognition softening his stern features immediately as he crossed the room to greet her, ignoring Mark entirely. Ms. Reed, I had no idea you'd returned to oversee Carter Tech's operations full-time, Gary said, extending his hand for a firm, sincere handshake. He turned to address the entire silent conference room, laying out the full story behind their pivotal business deal for everyone present to hear. 3 years ago, our board unanimously voted against signing any contract with a fledgling unknown startup like Carter Tech, convinced the company lacked stability to fulfill large-scale medical software orders. Elaina traveled to our corporate headquarters 7 separate times to deliver customized revised solution blueprints, even presenting a 2-hour technical sales pitch while running a fever of 103 degrees Fahrenheit. Her relentless dedication and transparent business integrity convinced every board member to take a chance on this company when no one else would. Gary slid a faded internal board meeting memo onto the conference table for all to read, the handwritten recommendation at the top explicitly crediting Elena's professionalism as the sole deciding factor behind their partnership approval. He shot Mark a sharp, unimpressed glance before delivering a final, consequential statement that sent shockwaves through every Carter Tech manager in attendance. If Elaina Reed is no longer involved in the day-to-day oversight of our Thompson medical account, our board will immediately terminate all active multi-million-dollar software contracts with Carter Tech effective end of business tomorrow. Mark stood helpless beside the table as Gary and Elaina exchanged quiet, respectful conversation about upcoming project adjustments, realizing every valuable client relationship he'd claimed to cultivate independently had been built entirely by Elena's tireless efforts 3 years prior. Before the conference room's tension could ease, another panicked project manager sprinted through the doors, gasping for breath as he delivered catastrophic news regarding Carter Tech's largest active client contract with Grant Logistics. The Grant Logistics data platform suffered a total system failure 2 hours ago, resulting in continuous operational outages, costing their company roughly $350,000 in lost revenue each hour. Their executive team issued an official ultimatum: we have 2 hours to fully resolve the bug, or they will void our $58 million full-scale development contract with immediate effect. Mark immediately directed Ken Bennett and the entire engineering team to rush to the client's on-site facility for emergency repairs, yet Ken shook his head with quiet defeat, explaining he'd submitted formal risk warnings about flawed core architecture weeks prior that Mark had outright rejected without review. Elaina retrieved the client executive's direct phone number from the project manager's trembling hands, dialing Victor Grant's line without hesitation. Victor answered the call on the first ring, his frustrated tone instantly softening upon hearing Elena's voice over the speakerphone broadcast to the entire conference room. "Elaina, we'd been hoping to reconnect with you to resolve these platform issues. If you can personally oversee all repair work, our team is willing to extend the deadline 48 full hours to complete full system remediation without contractual penalties." Mark stared on in stunned silence as Elaina closed the call, the client's willingness to bend strict contractual deadlines entirely based on her personal professional reputation. She coordinated cross-departmental emergency protocols across every Carter Tech division, directing equipment transfers, staffing rotations, and client communication timelines with effortless, unflappable authority that left every member of the leadership team watching with newfound respect. When the engineering team hit a critical roadblock, sourcing high-capacity backup database servers required to restore Grant Logistics' offline data archives, Elaina placed a single quick call to Paul Simmons, a technology equipment vendor she'd built a trusted professional rapport with during her years of client outreach. Paul committed to delivering the specialized server hardware to their facility within 2 hours, no upfront deposit or rental fees required as a professional favor to her alone. In a rare moment of unguarded humility, Mark approached Elaina in the busy open concept engineering floor hours later, his voice quiet and strained with reluctant gratitude as he acknowledged her critical intervention to save the company's largest active contract. "Thank you for stepping in to resolve this crisis for us." Elena's expression remained neutral, no flicker of warmth or forgiveness softening her features as she responded firmly, maintaining the professional boundary between group chairwoman and subsidiary general manager. I'm acting in the best interest of Reed Global's subsidiary assets, not doing you any personal favors. Please address me as Chairwoman Reed during all official working hours moving forward. Mark nodded stiffly, the weight of his years of ungrateful dismissal crashing fully over him as the engineering team erupted into loud, celebratory cheers. The data platform had been fully restored, Grant Logistics operations back online without further costly downtime. The relief of the resolved crisis faded quickly when Robert Hale arrived at the engineering floor clutching a finalized first-phase audit report. His expression grave as he revealed evidence of massive, unauthorized fund transfers routed through a shell company controlled by Sarah's cousin, Tyler Ross. Over 18 months, Carter Tech had issued 27 separate consultancy service payments totaling $18.6 million to Ross's empty shell agency. More than $8.4 million of those funds deposited directly into Sarah's personal checking accounts, with no verifiable business deliverables to justify the large expenditures. Sarah attempted to defend the contracts as legitimate marketing investments her agency had facilitated. Yet audit evidence proved the shell company had been formally registered just 3 days after Carter Tech finalized their landmark Thompson Medical partnership, meaning the agency had not even legally existed when Mark signed the original service retainer agreements to funnel corporate funds to Sarah's family network. Further second-phase audit investigations uncovered more damning proof of deliberate financial misconduct orchestrated with Mark's full written approval, including edited service contracts, duplicate billing invoices, and private text messages exchanged between Mark and Sarah, detailing their plan to siphon corporate revenue through the unregistered shell agency to fund personal luxury purchases outside official payroll channels. Faced with irrefutable written proof of coordinated asset misappropriation, Reed Global's board moved swiftly to issue formal termination paperwork for Mark's general manager position and place Sarah on indefinite paid administrative leave pending full legal review of the financial fraud charges. 3 days after the audit results were made public, Helen Carter arrived uninvited at Reed Global's main lobby, collapsing onto the marble flooring and weeping loudly as she begged Elaina to reverse Mark's termination and reconcile their broken marriage to restore the Carter family's former wealth and social standing. When Elaina stepped down from the executive floors to speak with her, Helen dropped to her knees on the lobby floor, pleading desperately for forgiveness for all the cruel, judgmental remarks she'd hurled at Elaina throughout the marriage. Elaina asked Helen to recall the harsh words spoken outside the divorce clerk's office, the declaration that Elaina had been nothing more than useless dead weight, draining the Carter household's resources, and Mark's cold assertion that she would amount to absolutely nothing without his wealth and social status to rely upon. Mark appeared at the lobby doorway moments later, worn and defeated, delivering the first genuine apology he'd ever offered Elaina for 3 years of neglect, dismissal, and ungrateful exploitation of her sacrifices. Elaina accepted his verbal apology, but made it clear she had no intention of rekindling their romantic relationship or returning to the subservient, invisible life she'd endured during their marriage. As Mark lingered in the lobby, processing the permanent loss of everything he'd spent years chasing, Shane Wells handed him a sealed, handwritten note penned by Arthur Reed before his passing, its single line of wisdom striking Mark to the core. A man who discards the woman who stood beside him through poverty will never deserve the prosperity she creates. 1 month later, Elaina presided over Reed Global's annual leadership summit, quarterly Carter Tech financial reports displaying record profit growth, improved client retention rates, and drastically reduced employee turnover, following Mark's departure from the subsidiary's leadership team. Ken Bennett shared that Mark had visited the corporate offices once to express quiet gratitude for Elaina, choosing not to pursue criminal fraud litigation against him, despite the overwhelming evidence of embezzlement. Yet Elaina made clear his future personal and professional trajectory held no relevance to her corporate responsibilities moving forward. Once the conference concluded for the day, Elaina drove back to the old residential neighborhood where she'd once lived with Mark during Carter Tech's impoverished founding phase, wandering past the tiny storefront noodle shop they'd frequented during lean startup months, and standing silently outside the home she'd sold to fund his company 3 years prior. Shane contacted her via phone mid-walk to inform her the Reed Global Board had unanimously approved a new youth entrepreneur grant foundation to be established under her namesake, a legacy initiative Arthur had requested she launch to support struggling startup founders navigating the same hardships she'd endured years earlier. Elaina pulled the faded property sales contract for her old family home out of her leather bag, tearing the aged paper into small pieces and letting the scraps drift away on the evening breeze, releasing every lingering weight of regret, heartache, and resentment tied to her former marriage and the years she'd spent suppressing her own talents to prop up Mark's fragile ego. Her phone buzzed moments later with a formal invitation to headline a national young entrepreneur panel as the keynote speaker, honoring her track record of building sustainable tech businesses and supporting emerging startup leaders across the industry. Elaina glanced out over the city's glittering evening skyline, remembering Mark's parting threat outside the divorce office that she would never amount to anything without him at her side. She deleted every remaining archived text message and photo tied to their failed marriage from her mobile device, turning her back on the old neighborhood and walking steadily toward the bustling downtown business district, lit up with thousands of glowing office windows, no longer defined as a discarded spouse, unappreciated housewife, or secondary background character in someone else's success story. Elaina walked forward fully secure in her own hard-earned power, freedom, and independent identity. Her victory had never been about making Mark and his family regret their cruelty. It lay entirely in the quiet, unshakable truth that from the moment she'd signed those divorce papers, she had become the sole, unrivaled owner of her own life and legacy.